equality, at the end of the day, can't tell us what it is that we should be treating equally. So what is about marriage is just as such, if it's understood as simply an intense, emotional, romantic, caregiving relationship, that would require it to be an exclusive relationship. Marriage is a comprehensive community, and it's comprehensive in that the act that unites spouses unites them comprehensively, unites them at all levels of their personhood. So to unite with another person will require a union that's a union of hearts, a union of minds, but also a union of bodies. There's one bodily function that's radically incomplete, that each and every one of us have half of. There's one biological system that each and every one of us are a half of a potential whole. So that when a man and a woman unite in a conjugal act, their bodies don't just rub up against each other or interlock or touch in the way that if I stuck my finger in someone's ear, we would say they just kind of interacted or touched, or you give someone a wet willy, that sort of a thing. That's not what's taking place. They truly form a unity. When the Hebrew Bible, when the book of Genesis speaks of the two becoming one flesh, it's not simply speaking metaphorically, it's not simply speaking poetically. It's actually revealing something that's true at the physical and at the metaphysical level. That in a man and a woman, when they unite in that conjugal act, truly become one flesh. So much so that 9 months later, it might require a name. And that begins to tell you something about the good of the relationship. In the same way that academic actions, doing research and writing papers and delivering lectures and attending lectures, were ordered towards the good of knowledge of the truth, so too that conjugal act, or when it's within the marital context, the marital act, is ordered towards the good of both creating new life and then the relationship as a whole of sustaining that new life. So it's about creating the environment both for the spouses themselves, so it's the love between the spouses, that's then conducive to bringing new human beings into the world and then raising new human beings to appreciate human goodness in all of its forms. So conscientious parents don't try to raise kind of narrowly focused children who only focus on this good or that good, children who know all of Shakespeare but know nothing else. Conscientious parents want their children to appreciate human goodness in all of its forms, whether it's beauty, music, art, athleticism, knowledge, friendship, marriages themselves, so that grandchildren will come. So this points that this comprehensive action that unites a man and a woman as husband and wife is then ordered towards this comprehensive good, the creating and then raising of new human beings within a context of spousal love. So that the love-making action is also the life-giving action. It's the one and the same act. Lastly, this can then explain why marriage calls for comprehensive commitments. So if you've been following so far, there's a comprehensive act, comprehensive good. That act and that good can then explain why marriage requires that spouses pledge their love and commitment and their fidelity till death do them part. That in order to unite comprehensively with another person, it has to be comprehensive throughout time. It can't be a temporary commitment. If you're holding something back, you haven't actually committed comprehensively. It has to be an open-ended, unconditional, for better or worse, sickness or in health, richer or poorer, till death do us part. And then likewise, for it to be comprehensive, it would also need to be exclusive. For it to be comprehensive at every moment in time means that you forsake all others. And the type of exclusivity that marriage calls for can now be explained on this vision of marriage. None of you are cheating on your spouses if you're married by attending this lecture. Marriage doesn't call for intellectual exclusivity. If any of you, when you go back to campus next week, if you play basketball or tennis with someone other than your spouse, you're not cheating on your spouse. Marriage doesn't call for athletic exclusivity. If you sleep with someone other than your spouse, you do cheat on your spouse. Because the action that's distinctive of marriage, the action that actually has the name of the marital act, is the act that is exclusive for marriage. And so this can then explain why that marital norm, if you think of monogamy, exclusivity, and permanency as being the three historic marital norms in the Western tradition and in the United States legal tradition, this vision of what marriage is can explain why. It can give a coherence. These aren't just arbitrary add-ons that if you happen to be a fan of monogamy, exclusivity, and permanency, go for it. But if you want to try a different flavor of marriage, go for that. This can explain that given what marriage is, it requires this sort of a relationship with these sorts of commitments. And as we were doing the research for this book, we saw that this simply wasn't the creation of Judaism or Christianity. We see it in all three of the great monotheistic traditions, but we also see it in ancient thinkers like Plato and Aristotle and Cicero. We see it in the canon law, the common law of England, and also the civil law of many Western nations. We see it in Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and Immanuel Kant. We see it in Eastern thinkers like Gandhi. What this suggests to my co-authors and me is that no given political, philosophical, or theological community created marriage. That marriage is built into human nature, and that different philosophical, theological, and political communities have tried to articulate and regulate and live out marriage with greater or lesser success. And if you look at what Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Kant, Locke, Gandhi say about marriage, they're all trying to articulate, using their own idioms, their own jargon, their own philosophical vocabulary and context, something that looks like this, because they're all grasping onto human nature. So from a theological perspective, marriage isn't simply in the order of grace. It's not simply a sacrament, though from a Catholic perspective, it is a sacrament. Before it was a sacrament, it was a natural institution. It's built into the creation narrative before Jesus then elevates it to the sacramental level. And this is why marriage isn't just for Catholics or for other Christians or for other theists. It's something that's a human universal. We see this more or less at all times and places throughout human history and across the globe. This is the densest part of the talk, and I know I only have 15 minutes left, but I had to belabor this section of it, the kind of Aristotelian argument, because this is the part that I think many people have forgotten. Partly because it's never been fully articulated in this kind of systematic way. It was common knowledge. But let me now, in the time that I have left, go more quickly through the second two questions. If that's what marriage is, the little blurb promised answering two other questions of why does marriage matter, and then what are the consequences of redefining marriage. So let me answer those more briefly. Why does marriage matter? For a political community, the government's not in the marriage business because it cares about your love life or my love life, because the government's a sucker for romance. If marriage was just about consenting adult love, we could get the state out of the bedroom. The reason the government's in the marriage business is that the union of a man and a woman can produce a child, and children deserve both a mother and a father. And the way that you non-coercively incentivize men and women to commit to each other as husband and wife, so that then they're capable of being mother and father to any children that they create, is by sustaining an institution called marriage. That marriage is based on an anthropological truth that men and women are distinct and complementary. It's based on a biological fact that reproduction requires both a man and a woman. It's based on a social reality that children deserve both a mother and a father. That whenever a baby is born, a mother is always close by. She's normally in the same room. That's a fact of biology. The question for law and the question for culture is, will a father be close by? And if so, for how long? And marriage is the institution that society is vastly different from our own, throughout human history and across the globe have used to maximize the likelihood that that man commits to that woman, and then the two of them committed to each other commit to that child. That when this doesn't happen, social costs run high. I'll skip ahead a little bit and just read you a quotation, and I'll ask you to name the speaker. We know the statistics. Children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They are more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves, and the foundations of our community are weaker because of it. Who's the speaker? Someone said Jesus, but someone else said Obama. It is Obama. Why was President Obama so forceful in speaking out about the importance of fathers? He gave that answer in a commencement address that he gave at Morehouse College, an all-male college. And he said, addressing that graduating class, quote, "I have tried to be for Michelle and my girls what my father was not for my mother and me. I want to break that cycle." And if we have more time, I'd go through some of the social science on. Obama summarizes it well in terms of poverty, crime, delinquency. Part of this also highlights the fact that there's really no such thing as parenting. There's no such thing as parenting in the abstract. There's mothering and there's fathering, that men and women bring different gifts to the parenting enterprise. Sometimes I'll ask audiences to do a thought experiment, that if it's a Saturday morning and a father is, I just gave the answer there. If a parent is wrestling in the living room carpet with a 5-year-old boy, teaching the 5-year-old boy that it's okay to put people in headlocks, but it's not okay to bite or to pull hair or to gouge out eyes, which parent's most likely in the living room? And then the answer is the father. And the same thing takes place with the 10-year-old boy in the backyard tossing around a football with a 15-year-old boy getting ready for a high school dance. That fathers help young boys mature into law-abiding, productive members of society called men. Fathers then do something complementary for their daughters. Fathers tend to be the ones who scare away bad boyfriends, who police, who's pursuing and dating their daughters. A father who is married to his daughter's mother also models what a good male-female relationship looks like and what you should be looking for in a potential husband. So then when we step back and look at the social science, we see that the boys who grow up without their fathers more likely to commit crime, less likely to graduate high school, more likely to end up in jail, less likely to be employed. Daughters who grow up without their fathers more likely to start sexual activity earlier in life, more likely to be pregnant outside of marriage. We quote a social scientist in the book from Rutgers University. He says, quote, "The burden of social science evidence supports the idea that gender-differentiated parenting is important for human development and the contribution of fathers to child rearing is unique and irreplaceable. We should disavow the notion that mommies can make good daddies, just as we should disavow the popular notion that daddies can make good mommies. The two sexes are different to the core, and each is necessary culturally and biologically for the optimal development of a human being." Now, obviously, President Obama turned out pretty well. He's the President of the United States of America. So when social scientists talk about the importance of a married mother and father, they can only speak, on average, for the most part, in generalities. But Obama himself, as we've heard, would be one of the first people to tell you how he wishes his father would have been involved in his life. And that's why he's trying to be for Michelle and his daughters what his father wasn't for him and his mother. So we don't want to give the idea that because of some of these social science statistics that anyone who grows up outside of a married mother-father home is somehow destined for failure in life. But we also don't want to be so indifferent to family structure that we don't point out the reality that growing up outside of that structure does place unique burdens on children and on mothers. So this is one of the reasons why the political community cares about marriage. That marriage is the best anti-poverty device that we've ever devised. That if you care about social justice and you care about limited government, so the right and the left, if you care about the poor and you care about liberty, a civil society institution like marriage is much better at producing good outcomes, allowing self-directed family units to care for themselves, to produce the next generation of citizens, than a big government program that tries to pick up the pieces of broken families, either in the form of a welfare state or in the form of a police state. Our prison populations and our bloated welfare system testify to that. So lastly, let me just highlight 3 consequences, and then we'll open up for questions. All 3 of these consequences of redefining marriage fall under the general rubric of ideas have consequences and bad ideas have bad consequences. That the law teaches. And when the law teaches, the law shapes culture. The culture then shapes our beliefs, and our beliefs then shape our actions. And the law will either enshrine one or the other vision of marriage. The law will either teach that marriage is a permanent, exclusive union of a man and a woman ordered towards uniting children with both their mother and their father, or the law will teach that marriage is about consenting adult romance of whatever size and shape the consenting adults choose. There are 2 substantive visions of marriage on the table, and the law will enshrine and enforce and teach one or the other. So the first consequence is that if we redefine marriage to make it a genderless institution, we have no public institution left that upholds even as an ideal that every child deserves both a mother and a father. Redefining marriage in this way sends a signal that marriage is primarily about the desires of the adults involved rather than the needs or the rights of the children involved. I was in Rome back in November when Pope Francis said that children have a right to a mother and a father. And then shortly thereafter, the Cardinal Prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith said children have a natural, inherent right to a mother and a father. He clarified that we're not just speaking about some religious right, we're talking about the natural law and the natural rights that flow from it. What happens with a genderless vision of marriage is it says that men and women are interchangeable so that mothers and fathers, therefore, are replaceable. And now, if you agree with President Obama about the importance of fathers, and if you think one of the largest problems we face today is the problem of absentee dads, 40% of all Americans are born to a single mother, 50% of Hispanics, and over 70% of blacks are born to single mothers. If you think that is one of the most pressing social problems in our nation today, how will we as a society insist that fathers are essential when the laws redefine marriage to make fathers optional? That's the first big picture consequence of redefining marriage. Second consequence is that the redefinition of marriage won't stop here, that there's no logical, principled reason for the redefinition of marriage to stop here. And to illustrate this, I'll just introduce you to 3 new words that activists have coined to describe where they would like to see the redefinition of marriage go next. The first is the term throuple. A throuple is a 3-person couple. Take the word couple and chop off the C and add a THR. This was introduced to my co-authors and me 2 or 3 years ago in New York Magazine. New York Magazine was doing a profile of a throuple in New York City, and this is more or less what it looks like. These are 3 guys who live together and love each other. They share a bed with each other. They share a bank account with each other. They cook meals for each other. They want to be able to co-own property together and visit each other in the hospital. They want exactly what the same-sex couple wants. And so if you go before the U.S. Supreme Court and you sue for marriage equality for the same-sex couple, on what principled basis would you deny marriage equality to the same-sex throuple or to the opposite-sex quartet? That the way that we arrived at monogamy is that it's one man and one woman who can unite in that comprehensive act that can create new life, and every new life has one mother and one father, and that marriage is about uniting those people in a stable, permanent, exclusive union. But once you say the male-female part of marriage is irrational and arbitrary and just a result of bigotry and animus, what's magical about the number 2? What's the principled basis in law and policy for reserving marriage as the union of 2 and only 2 consenting adults, once you've said the male-female part is irrational? The next term is the term monogamish. This was introduced to us in the New York Times Sunday magazine profile of the gay rights activist Dan Savage. Monogamish is a play on the word monogamous. Savage wants to keep the number 2, but he thinks we shouldn't be so concerned about infidelity. I think the title of the article was Married with Infidelities. And his argument was that one of the things that straight couples could learn from gay couples is the virtue of a sexually open relationship. That if marriage is primarily about your romantic, emotional bond with another person and your caregiving bond with another person, why should you expect that person to fulfill all of your sexual needs. And that provided there's no coercion and there's no deceit, spouses should be free to seek out sexual fulfillment outside of marriage, and that could actually enhance their relationship, understood as an emotional bond, a caregiving bond, commingling of assets, and of taking care. Lastly is the term wed lease. This was in the Washington Post a month after the Supreme Court decided the Defense of Marriage Act case. Wed lease is a play on the word wedlock. If wedlock denotes something strong, sturdy, and permanent, wed lease is meant to denote the exact opposite. Just like you can lease a car or lease a house, this lawyer writing in the Washington Post argued you should be able to lease your spouse. He said we have an unrealistic ideal of marriage being a permanent institution, and that's why so many marriages end in divorce. It would be better if we just signed up for a temporary marriage license in the first place. So have a 5-year or a 10-year wed lease instead of an open-ended wedlock. And then if it's not going well after 5 or 10 years, it just automatically dissolves. Just like at the end of your 12-month or 24-month apartment contract, your car lease, it automatically dissolves. But you could also renew it if it's going well. So if you're happy with your current spouse, you can keep your current spouse. But if not, it would just end without all of the heartbreak of divorce, because you didn't sign up for wedlock, you signed up for wed lease. Now, whatever you think about the morality of thruples and monogamous relationships and wed leases, whatever you think about the theology of these things, think about the public policy implications. The reason we have the government involved in the marriage business is to get a man and a woman to commit to each other permanently and exclusively so that any children that they produce have a mother and a father. But wed leases and thruples and monogamous relationships directly undercut that public purpose of marriage because they increase the number of sexual partners that men and women have, and they decrease the amount of commitment that they have. They make it more likely that we create fragmented families and fatherless children. And yet, as a logical matter, each and every one of these further redefinitions of marriage follows as night follows on day once you get rid of the male-female procreative aspect of marriage. The last consequence I'll mention, because I imagine everyone in this room is already familiar with it, this is the consequence for religious liberty. We've already seen in states that have redefined marriage that Catholic adoption agencies were forced out of the adoption space. These were adoption agencies that wanted to find homes for orphans with married moms and dads, and the state said, well, that's now discrimination. Unless you treat all married couples on an equal footing, so you treat the same-sex married couple in the same way as the married mom and dad, you're engaged in illegal discrimination, and we won't give you an adoption license if you're engaged in discrimination. This does absolutely nothing to help children find homes. This doesn't help one orphan to be adopted by shutting down Catholic Charities adoption agencies. All it does is score a point for political correctness. We've then seen cases of florists, photographers, and bakers, and various professionals who intersect with the wedding industry who have said, we have no problem serving gays and lesbians. We bake birthday cakes for gays and lesbians all the time. We do get well soon floral bouquets. Our only objection is to baking the same-sex wedding cake or to being the photographer at the same-sex wedding. They've been sued and have lost. They've gone to court when they were sued for declining to serve a same-sex wedding, and they were told you have to leave your faith at the door. The most famous opinion comes out of New Mexico with Elaine Photography. Elaine Huguenin's an evangelical Christian. She was asked to be the wedding photographer at a same-sex wedding. She politely declined. She was then sued. She was ordered to pay a $7,000 fine. When she appealed her case to the New Mexico State Supreme Court, the judge ruling that case said the price of citizenship, that was his exact phrase, is that Elaine has to set aside her faith and take these pictures. So this is not a live and let live movement. This is a movement of enforced orthodoxy.
Abortion is never safe, but unfortunately it is legal. 54% of women having abortions. So if you look into an abortion clinic and you look into a waiting room, more than half of the women sitting there waiting to have an abortion were using contraception at the time they got pregnant. What takes place inside of one of these supposed safe and legal abortion clinics is no better than what took place in the back alleys. Abortion is still not safe for women now. It was not safe for women then.